Welcome to Quilter's Architect. My name is Mark. On a previous video, I did a quilt called Grandfather's Flower Garden, and I worked through a good portion of our 5-inch square scraps. However, as you can see looking at the table here, I've kind of sorted some of them into different piles. You see our 5-inch square scraps. We still have quite a few of them, right? And so in today's video, I want to demonstrate making from start to finish a quilt called Posie Palooza that will use a large number of these 5-inch square scraps. After you watch this video, you might enjoy going to my playlist for Scrap Buster and watching the other videos that I've published about using your scraps. So when I say this quilt pattern is going to bust your 5-inch square scraps, I really mean it. This is going to use 480 of your 5-inch squares in total because this quilt pattern has 20 blocks in total, and those blocks are kind of like 25 patches. I'm calling them Posie patchwork blocks because they're not a pure 25 patch, because there's some other type of squares inside the block. But you can see how making 20 of these blocks in the quilt is going to use a large number of our 5-inch scrap squares. And so I'm looking forward to seeing this accumulation of scraps go down and get put to good use. And I hope you'll do the same and join me in making this quilt and bust your 5-inch scrap squares and also make a beautiful quilt at the same time. So let's take a look at the fabric requirements. And looking on page 2 of our pattern, if you're going to use yardage instead of scraps, you'll notice here that it's 8 3/8 yards of fabric. If you have 5-inch squares, again, that's 480 5-inch squares that we'll need from our scrappy fabric. And then just to make a distinction about this quilt pattern, I am using 3 fabrics to give a consistency to the quilt, so we'll be able to make out the different portions of the quilt which are scrappy, and they're in the shape of, they kind of look like flowers, and that's why it's called Posie Palooza. And so those 3 fabrics that I'm going to be using for consistency, those are labeled in the quilt as Snow, Midnight, and Lemon. And just to mention to you the fabric details, that fabric I'm using for the lemon color in the pattern, the lemon fabric, is from Marbella by Paula Nadelstern, and that's Benartex. And then also from that same line, I have the Midnight fabric, and I'll show those here on the screen so you can see what they look like. And then the third fabric, which I labeled as Snow, in the quilt pattern, I'm using a basic fabric by New Hue by Canvas Studio. And so those are the portions of the quilt, again, that are going to give the consistency look to the quilt. And those are coming in terms of like the center part of each of the blocks. And also we're going to be doing some flipping stitches, and those fabrics are used for those 3 things. The center portion is that yellow, and then there's that midnight for the flipping stitch on the 4 corners of that yellow square. And then on the 4 outside corners of each block, the Posie patchwork block, we're going to be using the Snow fabric to give our effect of a flower, the shape of a flower, by having a stitch and flip on the outside corner of each of those squares on the outside. And you can also see under fabric requirements that for the Snow fabric we need 5/8 of a yard, for the Midnight 1/8 of a yard, and for the Lemon we need 1/2 a yard. Given that I'm going to be using 5-inch square scraps for the vast majority of this quilt, there's not really any cutting to do for that, because in the past, as scrap fabric accumulated, it was cut down into the 5-inch squares already. However, for the other fabrics, I've already went ahead and done that cutting so that I don't have to have you agonize through cutting fabric with me. And so here you can see the Snow, and here you can see the Midnight, and here you can see the Lemon that I have for the center of all the blocks. And so just to mention briefly, if you're going to do this quilt and you're going to do the cutting for that Snow fabric, you're going to have to cut, if you're using width of fabric, which is 42 inches at least, you're going to need 9 strips of 4 1/4, and then you'll cut your 80 squares out of that. And then for the Midnight fabric, you'll need to cut 4 strips of 2 inch, and you'll be cutting 80 2-inch squares out of that. And then lastly, for the Lemon, we'll be cutting 3 strips of 5 inches, and we'll need 20 5-inch squares from those strips. And then just to mention briefly, I always include these notes in my quilt patterns. I'm assuming a 1/4 inch seam allowance in this pattern. Also, you can press the seams as desired unless otherwise indicated. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, for width of fabric, this pattern is expecting that you have at least 42 inches of usable fabric. So to get started, I want to demonstrate there's 3 basic steps to make these Posie patchwork blocks, and those are to make the center square with the 4 stitch and flips and the 4 outer corner squares with 1 stitch and flip. And then lastly, we'll assemble the entire block together using all the squares. But one thing I did with my 5-inch square scraps is I tried to go through them and I tried to organize them into like color categories. It's not perfect or anything, and of course everyone has their own way they want to do Scrappy, so I'm not suggesting anyone else follow this. You could do it if you wanted to, but you may like to just pull from your scraps as you go. But I thought it would help me to have, like, green and orange and browns and blues and reds and pinks and maybe purples and some other color categories. Like, this is a lot of dark fabric here. I'm not sure I'll use this because a little concerned that this might really stand out as this prominent block in the quilt if I use that black. It's a lot of black, it's not all black. And so what I plan to do before I start on my first step of making those corner blocks with the stitch and flip, I'm going to pick one of these stacks that I organized these 5-inch square scraps into, and I'm going to arrange my block on the table in the arrangement I think is going to make the most sense for it to look right. And again, that's a personal preference. People do different things. Sometimes they'll take their camera and they'll take a picture of what they've arranged, and then there's like a filter on a lot of cameras to change it to monochromatic, which is like black and white. And then if you have like a concentration of darks or lights, sometimes that'll jump out at you and you can see if it's well distributed inside your arrangement. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is pick one of these stacks, and I'm kind of leaning towards this stack, this has got like a lot of the light red and pink in it, and I'm going to go for that stack to start with the first one I'm going to arrange. Okay, so I think I will take a picture of this and see how it looks with the monochrome filter on it. And here's that picture with a monochrome filter applied. Okay, so I felt like this looked a little too dark when I looked at the monochrome picture. So I'm going to swap a few squares around. Here it is again with the monochrome filter after I made those adjustments. So to help me keep these blocks the way I chose to arrange them, I'm going to label them. Some people use pins. I think they're pins that are labeled or numbered, which might be easier. But this is what I'm going to do for now. I have these labels here handy. And that way, if you turn them around after you start working on these blocks to do your flipping stitches or your assembly, you kind of know the way that you had your blocks arranged and you don't even have to think about it. The only thing about these labels is you don't want to iron on them too much. But the nice thing is they don't stick you like pins do. So looking at page 3, the first of 3 steps to make one of these blocks is to make the Posie Patchwork block center units. And so you can see here I have fabric pieces C, which is from my Midnight fabric, and there are 4 of those, and then our fabric piece D, which is our lemon fabric, and we're going to do flip and stitches, right? If you haven't done stitch and flip before, you can see this appendix page in the pattern for detailed instructions as well. So we're going to put our small squares on the corner of the larger piece of fabric, and we'll sew diagonal lines on a line we're going to draw on each of these pieces of fabric. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is I'm just going to draw a line, and that way it gives us something to go by since it's such a small piece of fabric. And it's a little bit challenging sometimes to do corner to corner accurately if we don't have a line. Some people who are more experienced, they can do that freehand and they won't even need a line. In my case, I find that the line is helpful, and so I'm going to do that. Okay, so I have all 4 of those marked. Next, I'll join those. And one other thing I'll mention is this is something I'll be watching since I used labels and I didn't have pins with numbers or letters on them. If I'm going to iron something where I'm going to have to iron these stitch and flips outwards to press the seams open, I'll probably remove the label while I'm doing that ironing because it'll be hard to iron this without putting the iron on top of that label. Now you could also pin these if your preference is to pin. One other thing I would say is I find it helps me to do like a thread width to the outer corner of this smaller square on the outside of the line I drew instead of directly on the line. And the idea behind that is if this does get a little wonky and it pivots one way or the other, it gives us a slight amount extra fabric outwards so that we don't end up having like a short corner on one side or the other. So that's again not a precise thing, but it's something we can do to kind of make this a little bit less prone to issues. Because when you do that flip, it's very possible that when you press it, there could be a slight distortion, and that's something that we want to try to deal with. Because if our square in the end is too small, we're probably going to have some issues with our quilt because it's gonna be an issue when we join all our squares together. The only thing I would say is here you can see I didn't do real good at the end. I actually did more than a thread width, which is probably not the best. So that's something that's kind of hard to see exactly sometimes. So let's see if that one did a little better. Yeah, that one's more like close on the line just to that right hand side. Now everyone has their preferences, right? So you may prefer to go directly on the line, and that's fine. Whatever works the best for you. So now we have a square with the 4 smaller squares joined to it, and I need to cut off the excess, right? So I'll put my 1/4 inch line on that thread where I sewed the 2 pieces together and cut off the excess, and then we can press open our seams. Okay, so there I'm ready to do my pressing, and I'll do that next. And of course, with such a small piece of fabric, it's really kind of challenging to press these open and not have the iron on the other stitch and flips at all. I guess you could press these from the back and press the seams open. I decided I'm not going to do that. But if you think that gives a better outcome for you, share your comments about what you think is the best way to do it. Okay, so there is our center unit for our block that has our 4 stitch and flips. And if a person wanted to, I guess they could also check it for accuracy since we are dealing with combining 5 pieces of fabric here. A person could actually do some squaring on this to make sure it's 5 inches square. So I'll starch this first. I think with doing the thread width stitching slightly on the other side of that line does cause these smaller squares to be sticking out a little bit more, right? So leads to a little bit of excess fabric there. But anyways, I guess a person can decide what they want to do. Do they want to sew directly on the line and hope that there's no distortion and that their block comes out with the fabric lining up perfectly, or go on the other side of the line and then starch and trim these as necessary. So next on page 3, we want to make our Posie patchwork block corner units. And so each of these squares will just have a single stitch and flip, right? And this is using fabric piece A, which is our snow fabric, along with the outer squares that we selected for our block. So we'll be sewing like this, right? Joining this snow fabric to the scrappy fabric. And it is, in this case, if you want your squares that you chose for your outer corner block to end up oriented the same, the way you arrange them, it is kind of important to think about which corner you will join the flip and stitch to. Because if, for example, let's say you had a bird or a cat or something else on there that you wanted to be oriented properly, and you joined the stitch and flip to the wrong corner, then by the time you got done, you might turn it around and it wouldn't be correct. So that's something to think about when you're choosing how to lay this stitch and flip smaller square on the other scrappy square. And for this, in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a pencil to draw this line, because this is a lighter fabric and would be no way to see that light color from that other marker. Okay, so now that we have the lines drawn on all 4 of our fabrics that we'll do the stitch and flip on, we'll join these fabrics and then cut off the excess and then press them open. So once again, for our stitch and flips, we have this excess fabric over here, right? So we'll trim that off. I'm going to remove these labels before I do the pressing. I don't want to put that iron on that label. Now we have all of our corner stitch and flip units done. The next step will be to join all of our corner units and our center unit and our scrappy squares into rows, and then join those rows so that we can have our entire block. So I placed my corner units and my center unit back in the respective row of blocks that they belong to. And you can see that when I collected up these blocks, I have them in the order of the blocks in the row per the labels. And you could join this block together in different ways. It's not really very 4-patch compatible because it's 5 squares wide and 5 squares tall, but it is one thing you could do. You could join like the first 4 squares from rows A and B into 4 patches if that's the way you prefer to do it, or you could do rows and then join all the rows, all 5 rows, into the entire block. I think what I'm going to do is do some chain piecing and just join all the rows, all 5 rows together in their individual blocks. And then I'll join all 5 of those units to create the entire block. So I'm going to continue on and join all these blocks into rows, and once I have all 5 rows together, we'll take a look at that and continue. And here you can see the 5 rows all ready to join together as units. So next I'll join these 5 rows together and I'll show you the finished block. Now, one last thing I'm going to do with these blocks is it's really big. I don't have a squaring ruler large enough to square this. So I'm just going to do corner to corner to cut off these ravelings. So here's the finished block in the pink and light red scraps. I think this turned out really nice. It's going to be interesting to see, using the various categories of colors or color groupings, fabric groupings, how all these large flowers look next to each other in the quilt. Time to move on to arranging the next block. I'm going to go with blue. I have a pretty healthy stack of fabrics in the blue category. And so let's put one of these together and see what it looks like. And here that is with the monochrome filter applied. Okay, I feel like with the monochrome picture filter on, I have a concentration of dark up here. So I'm going to switch something out. The rest is fairly balanced, so kind of thinking of, see what that looks like in monochrome. And here it is with the adjustments in a monochrome filter again. Since I've already demonstrated how to make the block in 3 steps, I'm going to go ahead and label my squares here, and then I'm going to go off camera and I will put this block together, and I'll come back and I'll show you the finished block. Here is my blue block all joined together, trimmed the edges, starched it before I did that. So I also like the way this one turned out. This looks really nice. Time to move on to another fabric grouping. So I grouped together some fabrics that are not all of them, but kind of loosely grouped together. Oranges. And so I think I'm going to next do one of the blocks out of these fabrics. Get an orange variation on our Posie Palooza block. I think I'll take a picture of that and see what that looks like in monochrome. Here's what that arrangement looks like with the monochrome filter applied. I think I'm going to switch this one to the other side. Really looks more pink. Okay, I'm going to take another picture and see how that looks. And here that is in monochrome with that adjustment. And here's the finished block. This one looks nice as well. Time to move on. So I have another stack of 5-inch square scraps that I grouped together out of the box or the tub. These are kind of in the purple, lavender, mauve, colors like that. So I'm going to arrange a block like that. I think I'll take a picture of that and see how that looks in monochrome. And here it is with the monochrome filter applied. And here's the completed block. It's really interesting how scraps can come together to make a really nice looking block. Time to make a block out of some red fabrics. And there's the red block with the monochrome filter applied. Here's the red block all finished up. I really like this one. It's one of my favorites. It'll be interesting to see if this concentration of red is real prominent in the overall quilt or it just blends in with the other block. Time to move on to the next block. Well, within our 5-inch square scrap, we also have a fairly big concentration in gray tones or black. So I'm going to try to put some of these together to make a block. Give us some nice variety. Definitely need some more light in this block. It's about all the light stuff there is. This is kind of like light, but not really. Well, I definitely have a huge concentration of dark here, looks like to me. To move some things around. Start to make yourself a little crazy moving this stuff around. Take a picture of this and see what this looks like in monochrome. Here it is with the monochrome filter applied. Okay, so I switched this block out because I had this block repeated here and here. Okay, here is my gray tones and black block. I also really like the way this one turned out. Some of these fabrics are really cool and they look neat together in a flower. So earlier I did a blue block, but it was kind of a mix. It had a lot of teal in it. So I'm going to go for a little bit more concentrated on blues. Try to not have so much of the teal in it. There might be a little bit still, but trying to go for more of the medium to darker blue. Okay, I think I'm going to take a picture of that and see how that looks in monochrome. And here it is with the monochrome filter applied. Okay, so in monochrome, this just looked like a big light L. So I'm going to move something around to break that up. Maybe bring a light block down here, or a light square down here. Yeah, I think that might be better. I'll check that again in monochrome. And here it is again in monochrome with the adjustments made. And here's the completed block. These blues make a really pretty flower. Okay, time to arrange a block out of some rust fabrics. And here it is in monochrome, and here's our finished block. Well, I still have quite a few here in my scraps with this kind of in the pink ranges of colors. So I'm going to arrange another block here. Okay, I'm going to see what that looks like in mono. Here it is with the mono filter applied. Here's the pink one all finished up. This will be a nice variation on the other, which has pink and light red. And now I'm going to move on to neutrals. Okay, so I have this stack of neutral fabrics here. Let's see what we can put together with this. It's the same fabric, but This one has more dark in it. Might use that again somewhere. Let's see. Seems like it's like that, but not the same. I wonder if one of these newspaper ones would be enough different to look quite a bit different. There we go. Got 3 of them, but not one of them is the same. I think I'll take a picture of that. The only thing right away that jumps out is these 3 together. Let's see here. Which light one could we swap? If I swap a light one, it's going to make something else have 3 darks together. I think I like that better. I'm going to take a picture of that and see what it looks like in mono. Here it is with the monochrome filter applied. 2 things I want to change. I have this light alternating pattern here. It seems like a pattern almost, like a repeating pattern. So, and also this newspaper is right below that one, just 2 blocks. So I want to switch that with something else to break up so many light ones here in a sequence. Move that one with the bird over there. Okay, I'm going to see what that looks like in mono. Here it is with mono filter. Here's my neutral block all finished up, and this one looks really nice as well. So time to move on to another fabric selection. I think I'm going to go for a more red, concentrated red block. Okay, so here is still from our 5-inch square scrap. Got quite a few here with this red in them, so I'm going to arrange one of these and see how this comes out. Okay, I think I'm going to check that out and take a photo and do monochrome filter. And here it is with the monochrome filter applied. And here's the completed block. This is another beautiful one. Okay, time to make a dark red block. Here's that arrangement with the monochrome filter applied. After seeing that, I think I'll move a few squares around. With the monochrome filter with those adjustments applied. And here's the finished block. I really like these red ones. Time to make one of these blocks from our yellow-based green fabrics. And here's that arrangement with a monochrome filter applied. Need to move a few squares around here. And with those adjustments in mono again. Okay, here is my Posie Palooza block, yellow-based green, and this one turned out really nice as well. Time to move on to the next fabric combination, and I think I'm going for a purple this time. So still have all of this fabric in the purple, maybe a little pink in there, but mostly purple. So going to see what I can put together with this. I think I'll see what it looks like in a picture with a monochrome filter. So here it is with the monochrome filter applied. Looks nice. Here it is completed. I think the purple is giving the red a run for its money. Time to do another gray block. Still have quite a bit of fabric in this category left. Even though these are gray tones, I'm still applying the monochrome filter to be consistent. I think we need to move a few squares around here to balance this out. And there's our block all completed. Okay, from the blues, from the scraps, still have a lot of the medium blues here. So I'm going to do another Posie Palooza block with these medium blues. I'm going to take a monochrome picture of that and see what that looks like. And here's a picture with monochrome filter applied. And here's our finished block. This one really turned out nice as well. Time to use up some more of these orange fabrics. Here's that arrangement with a monochrome filter applied. And here's the completed block, and orange makes a beautiful flower. Time to make an aqua Posie Palooza block. And here's that arrangement with the monochrome filter applied. Looks like I need to move a few squares around here. Here's that arrangement with those adjustments with the monochrome filter applied. So there's my light aqua Posie Palooza block all finished up. This one turned out looking really nice. Time to move on to the next block, and I think it's the last block. It's time to make a dark blue Posie Palooza block. And here that is with a monochrome filter applied. And here's our dark blue block all completed. This is also very nice. If you're keeping count, you're probably wondering, where's block 20? Because I've only done 19. Well, I always do at least one test block when doing a pattern. And the first block I did to test the pattern and the instructions. So you'll see that included when I assemble the quilt. So here you can see on the floor all 20 blocks arranged in the arrangement I plan to assemble the quilt in. And of course I'm labeling these so that I can keep them straight as I join the rows together. I'm going to join these blocks as 4 patches. So here's my first 4 patch. And here I have the 2 4 patches representing rows 1 and 2 ready to join together. So just briefly showing before joining these two units together, I'm pinning where the first seams come together at one end, also in the middle of this diamond, in the middle of, where the two rows come together, and then at the other end, also where there's the first or the last seams coming together. And here are rows 1 and 2 all joined together. This is looking really nice. And here are my 2 4 patches for rows 3 and 4. I'll join these together next. And here are rows 3 and 4 all joined together. And here I have the top, middle, and bottom units of the quilt top ready to join together. This is a large quilt, so I draped over the long arm so I could get a picture of the entire thing joined together. And here's the best picture I could get from flat on the floor. If you choose to make this quilt and you go with 4x5 blocks, it's a fairly large quilt. So you're going to find that you probably don't have any backing fabric that's big enough. And so what I'm going to do is this is my backing fabric that we chose from the fabrics we have on hand. And we also had some of this fabric left. I'm going to sew a strip of this along the edge of the raw edge of the backing fabric. And that way my backing fabric will be large enough for this quilt. So that's what I'm going to do next before I move on to the long arm. So here's what that strip looks like at one end of my backing fabric. Okay, I have the backing here ready, and I'm going to pin it to the long arm. And so basically we just pin one end of the backing to one leader, and then once that's on, we'll pin the other end on the other side. Here you can see we have the quilt top, backing, and batting all loaded onto the long arm machine. Here you can see the quilt pattern we chose on the long arm machine, flutterbys. Here's the long arm machine running just to see things get started. And here are a couple close-ups of the quilting that the long arm's doing. We just happen to have enough of this fabric on hand to do the binding with. So here's my fabric cut into 2.5-inch strips. I cut 11 of them. That way I have some extra at the end to join the miter joint together. And I'll be joining each of the strips with a diagonal from corner to corner like this. And here you can see one of those already joined together. And we'll cut the excess fabric off, leaving a 1/4-inch seam allowance. And we'll press all of our seams open where our strips are joined together. And then fold the binding in half with wrong sides together, and then press. And here's my binding all ready to go. Just time to bind the quilt. And first I'll join the binding to the quilt with the rough side to the outside edge. Before sewing the binding to the front side of the quilt, I changed my thread to a different color. I chose black. I also changed the stitch length on the sewing machine to 3. We hung the quilt up on the pole barn so we could get a nice picture of it. Here's a look at the entire quilt. Well, I hope you enjoyed this sew along. I'm also hopeful that it inspired you to think about making this quilt and busting your 5-inch square scraps. I'm really happy with the way this turned out, and if you enjoy videos like this and receiving free quilt patterns and you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I encourage you to do so. Please leave your comments with your feedback or suggestions. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up, and until my next video, I'm wishing you happy sewing and beautiful finishes.